Okay, welcome back. Thanks for your patience. We're now answering questions live through the stream, and we're going to get right into them. We have Dr. Jim White here on my left, your right, and James Balog on my left, on my right, your left. So they'll be taking your questions, and Sarah Perfader is our social media producer. She'll be starting with the first several questions. Sarah?
I'm just going to go through these in the order that they came in to me, and this first question is for James Balog. Even with the overwhelming power of your images, some people still don't accept the implications. Can you give some guidance as to what answers you've developed for these people? I know you touched on this, but maybe you can summarize again.
I think the most critical thing is that we really have to be open-hearted about thinking about the evidence and not being locked in our belief systems. Once you think about the evidence of climate change and rapid environmental change in the world in general, then you have an obligation and responsibility to use your voice. Start with that. Use your voice to reshape the world around you. Do what you can with the power you have in the world you have. And some people have more power than others. Politicians have tremendous leverage and reach. People who are in the technology business have tremendous leverage and reach. But all of us can influence our schools, our work environments, our homes, our family life, and spread this news. When I was a little boy, the Cold War seemed to be a permanent fixture of existence. I never thought that the nuclear weapons standoff between Russia and the U.S. would ever stop, but it did because it was a bad idea. And I think similarly, we're going to see a shift in how the world responds to climate change. We are seeing a shift already, in fact.
Okay, next question again for you, Mr. Balog. Are the glaciers also releasing carbon dioxide, thus accelerating the problem?
Not to the best of my knowledge. If there's any gases coming out of the Arctic melting processes, it's coming from melting permafrost, which is releasing methane.
No, that's exactly right. Ice cores are about 10% air. It's a small amount. The far more important and bigger problem is the amount of carbon that's locked up in frozen soils in the Arctic.
Okay, and they would also like to know on a more practical level, does Earth Vision Institute have a 501c3 status?
We actually have a fiscal sponsor called the Wild Foundation, and all of our donations go through the Wild Foundation. And we have one of our donors covers all of the commissions that the Wild Foundation takes. It's a complicated way of saying that every dollar donated actually gets into our program work, and we're very grateful for our donation partners because that's the only way that we get our work done.
This is John Morales from NBC6 in Miami. I do have a question from a follower on Twitter, Eric Nielsen. This is for Dr. White. He's asking, why do you expect a 1 meter sea level rise by 2100 when satellite data shows only about a quarter of that?
The pace with which sea level is rising will increase. And that's there's some very simple physics behind that in terms of melting ice, in terms of the thermal expansion of the ocean as the atmosphere expands. So one of the things we try to caution people is that just because you're getting a certain amount of sea level rise today, don't expect that to be the pace with which it goes into the future. We know that physics will apply, and we know that physics tells us that you've got to consider the fact that you're going to get an increasing rate of sea level into the future. The 1 meter, the 3 feet, is a conservative number. Most of the numbers we're seeing these days are a little bit more than that. So I think that that's it's something that because the physics are pretty straightforward, because it's pretty simple, to not expect that I think is a mistake.
And just as a follow-up, I mean, as we mentioned during the Q&A at the end of your session, cities are already planning for just about a meter, which is 2.7 feet, by 2060. So at least at some of the local levels, they're certainly contemplating that acceleration in sea level rise.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important to recognize that because it is very good, solid, settled physical science, these are things that communities can plan around and can move forward on. The real challenge, John, as you and I were talking about, is how do how do you see this as a long-term, this problem? This is something that's going to be with us for hundreds of years.
This is for Dr. White. I spoke to Dr. Balog. I'm assuming you're a doctor. They just said
Honorary.
honorary. Well, we'll call you doctor regardless. You guys gave great talks today. Enjoyed both of you immensely. Dr. Balog and I were talking about the messaging for the AGW. We had some questions earlier about some of the politics involved. And I feel that you guys do an excellent job with the message, but some of your colleagues fail in that regard. I wanted your opinion on that.
Well, I mean, first, thank you for thinking that we do a good job of this. I think both Jim and I have spent, quite a bit of our careers engaged in the public sector and have learned how to get out of our science modes and into a more human mode, if you will, when it comes to communicating. I think it's, when I talk to other scientists, I talk to them as a scientist. And I will say, I'll talk in terms of probability and all these other things. When scientists talk to the average person, they need to talk to the average person as if that was the average person, not as if it's a scientist. That's one of the problems that a lot of my friends who are scientists make. I mean, they make that mistake thinking that everyone understands these problems and understands the mathematics and the physics and all these things like that.
So how do you get your colleagues then to start thinking more like that when they're not talking to a group of their peers?
I don't know that I will ever get all of them to do that. I do think that the educational system is changing, that when we educate earth scientists and environmental scientists today, we talk to them about media. We talk to them about talking to the media. This conference is a fantastic example of that. It's a watershed. In the 20-something years of this conference, the way in which we talk about these problems has fundamentally changed because we understand that the translation of scientific information to the public is really an important piece of what we do.
Turning our attention back to Florida, let's see, I apologize, I've lost my place here. Okay, I've heard from a reliable source, this is for Dr. White, that some places of freshwater reservoirs in Florida are turning into saltwater reservoirs, and that is due to the porous soil combined with sea level rise. Can you confirm that?
Yes, that is true. Florida is sand and coral. It's all pretty porous. And the interface between freshwater and saltwater, which is going to determine where people get their fresh water, that's moving inland because sea level is rising and it's pushing back the fresh water, which is flowing down through the soils of Florida. There's also the problem that water is being diverted as it flows down for agriculture for other purposes. So, for example, there's a whole bunch of information about the Everglades that you can bring into this conversation as well. But the questioner is very correct.
Okay, and this one is for Dr. Balog. We're wrecking the glaciers at a rapid rate. How long would it take for us to rebuild them if it was possible?
It's a long, complicated story, and I'm not sure any of us have the answer. All glaciers are not created equal. There's glaciers that aren't much bigger than this building, and then there's glaciers that are the size of the state of Colorado. So that's I'm going to have to waffle around on that, and it would take, in best case scenario, maybe a couple of decades to start to rebuild the smaller ones, but possibly centuries. In fact, certainly centuries for the bigger ones. Yet I think I would like to emphasize that this is not a question of glaciers being an endangered species. It's more a question of looking at glaciers as a manifestation of systemic environmental change that's happening around the world.
This next question from online says, this to Jim White, how many years, 10, 50, or 150, do we still have till our sea levels rise enough to affect borders such as Florida and Delaware, et cetera?
An excellent question. In order to raise sea level by, say, 30 feet, you're looking at least hundreds of years. The process, I don't think, is going to proceed much faster than 2 to 3 meters per 100 years. That's, if you look at the history of sea level rise on the planet, that's kind of the pace with which we can expect things to happen. Now, having said that, there may be episodes of higher rise rate, and there may be episodes of lower rise rate. But this is, I don't know how best to put it, but it's a long, slow retreat.
Thank you. Again, for Dr. White, you pose an interesting dilemma during your presentation. Your comments about the poorest of poor versus James Balog's data about energy per capita and income, how do those two things reconcile? Maybe you could both address that.
I'm not sure what we said was in conflict, but the point I was trying to make, and I think Jim would agree with this, that in order to solve these problems, you have to have global engagement. And if you've got a sizable fraction of the population who really can't afford to care about the environment, then you've got trouble. You've got a problem. That doesn't then turn around and say that the richest on the planet don't have a role in this. They certainly have a role in this. We can be leaders. As a rich country, we can be a leader in terms of changing the technology, in terms of finding ways to live more sustainably on the planet, and then translate that technology to these poorer countries so that they don't have to go through what we went through. Jim, you want to?
I couldn't say that any better. That was quite eloquent, and we'll leave it at that.
Okay, I'm going to walk across the room because the Summit County Voice asked a question earlier and the stream cut it off. And I'm going to allow him to ask it again, and if you guys could please answer it again.
The question was to try and describe what some of Dr. Balog, some of the things you talked about in terms of melting ice and how they manifest in this area, in Colorado and in the western U.S.
You know, we talked about that a little bit before, but there is one thing that I missed that I would like to add. There's a volatility in the weather that seems to be increasing. You know, these dry, warm years seem to be getting drier and warmer. The wet years seem to be getting wetter and colder. So that's a component of this too. So we're more likely in this region to be seeing, you know, when we hit these warm pockets the way we did in the mid-2000s, it's really hot and dry. And you look around you, look, I've been skiing for 50 years. I've skied a lot of powder all over the world and done a lot of ski mountaineering trips. But boy, about 10 years ago, you looked around Colorado and said, huh? What happened to my beautiful mountains? Where'd all the snow go? Where did the winter go? So we'll be seeing more of those kinds of episodes. The general knowledge seems to be that we're going to be seeing less snowpack on average as the years go on. But it's this volatility that I think we need to be particularly conscious of, and that applies to storms in the southeast, the northeast, in Europe, and all over the place, this volatility increasing.
Okay, well, thank you very much. This ends the question and answer period. The online viewers have asked their questions, and you guys have been gracious enough to sit here and answer them. So thank you very much. We're going to end the day here. We appreciate it, although tonight this is just a reminder that we're having a town hall meeting where the town of Breckenridge is being invited to come here to the Doubletree Hotel starting at 6 o'clock. And we'll have Dr. Jim White and James Balog to talk about the science of a changing Arctic, and also the adventures that James Balog has had. So thank you once again. Please join us back for the live stream. And we'll also have Old Dominion University, excuse me, Old Dominion University online to watch this presentation as well from Hampton Roads, Virginia, and they'll have some questions as well. So thank you very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here tonight at 6 o'clock Mountain Time.